Generally speaking, I think a good settlement is better than a lovely world war.
You heard at the top all of this concern about China. This is spooking the markets a little bit today. Joe's right. It's a decline of under 2% for the Dow, but still down 460 points is a number that catches your attention. And when you look at China's markets, down 5.5% and down 7%. That is certainly something that is catching their attention today, too. I can't think of three better people to talk about this morning. Bill, you've spent so much time going back and forth with China. You know the Chinese leadership very well and can understand maybe what they're thinking on some of these things. Charlie, you've spent so much time getting excited about investing there. And Bill, you've invested there as well. Warren, same thing. All three of you have traveled there and spent this time. I just wonder what you're thinking about this morning as you hear these headlines. And Bill, you're the new one at the table today, so I'll ask you to start off with this. What are your thoughts on what you hear with this tweet and the potential for a real trade war?
Well, I think good trade relations are an incredible win-win for both countries. And it's dangerous if people think this is a zero-sum game. And so I'm hopeful that despite the latest announcement, there is a trade agreement and the two countries can find ways to work together. It's the most important relationship in the world. Both sides bring a lot of strengths. So I understand why markets are a little bit worried that these tariffs are going to get higher and higher.
When we first got the tweet, there had been some initial reports that Li Hu and the delegation from China might not be coming here. That's what we were hearing last night. This is the first I've heard just a moment ago that the Chinese have confirmed that they will be sending that delegation this week. That in itself is good news. But how do the Chinese kind of deal with this when they're faced with real force, like I think that tweet yesterday was?
Well, I'm not an expert on negotiation, but it creates a dynamic where both sides could start escalating against each other, which would be a lose for both sides. So, this week it'll be interesting. Even though China's not a democracy, the political dynamics don't allow them to look like they're caving in to a unilateral position.
And Charlie, you are an expert in negotiation. What do you think?
Well, hardly, but, well, if you go back, we put a tariff on trucks to prevent the Japanese from totally squelching the whole American auto industry. And that lasted a long time. It wasn't the end of the world. So if we end up with some trade settlement that involves some tariffs on both sides, I don't get excited about it at all. I regard it as part of normal life. Generally speaking, I think a good settlement is better than a lovely world war.
Some tariffs are one thing. 10%, we seem like our economy has gone along just fine, even with the 10% tariff that existed on those $200 billion to date. Is 25% tariffs on potentially all 500 billion plus of the imports coming in. Would that concern you about the American economy?
Well, I don't think we want a full-scale tariff war that's just as high as both sides can make it. That would be massively stupid. And if both of them are a little disappointed with the negotiations and feel a little roughed up, that's what they should feel.
What do you mean they should feel roughed up?
Well, both sides, since a settlement is so much better than a war, trade war for both sides, they ought to just get used to having a little loss of face and make some kind of a settlement. And I think they will.
What do you think about us taking a stance, us being America, taking a stance with China to this point?
Well, I don't think Trump is totally crazy to say that on some occasions you put a tariff on to save some domestic industry.
Is he right that we have been on the losing side of the deal for some time? There's a lot of Americans who feel that.
I think he thinks of it more as a loss if we've got a trade deficit. And I don't think that's at all automatic. So I don't totally agree with him, but I agree with Trump in part.
Warren, what do you think in terms of who pays the tariffs? I mean, it has boosted the U.S. Treasury. But a lot of those tariffs are being paid by the companies that import the goods and then passed on to consumers.
Yeah, they're a tax on consumers, and you know, as such, it changes what people buy. It changes where things are produced. I mean, you can readjust the world through tariffs, and generally speaking, I mean, there's obvious exceptions for key equipment, military equipment, or but I generally think that a world that adjusts to something very close to free trade, more people will live better than in a world with significant tariffs and shifting tariffs over time. I mean, it was a subject of constant negotiation and that sort of thing.
Probably less chance in war, too, if there's heavy trade on both sides.
Yeah.
Not a trade war. You mean a real
war?
Real
war, yes.
Because.
But you got to remember that our country, the United States, ran on tariffs for the first 150 years. That was all the revenue we had. This is not like some novel new thing is coming in. This is an old subject.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, of course, I'd rather have total goodwill and everybody getting along. But I don't think it's the end of the world. There's some little tension on the subject. There has been since the start of the country.
Bill just now said he's not surprised by the market's reaction. Warren said the same thing earlier this morning. What about you?
Well, what do I care about a brief, temporary reaction over some uproar over trade negotiations?
Does that mean...
There are all so many little ripples in space-time to me.
Look, if you look at Chinese stocks in one market down 5.5%, and the other in the Shenzhen market down by over 7%, our futures are down, but that's still a decline of less than 2% this morning. Does that mean it's more painful to China than to us?
Well, I don't think China likes its market going down as a consequence of a trade uproar. I think the people are more like this. Settle a thing because they had this uproar today.
Settling sounds like a great alternative, but
it certainly does.
There have been a lot of friction along the way. The biggest one may be just how do you enforce it, and the feeling, at least among many of the trade negotiators in the United States, that when we've cut deals with China in the past, they say things and then don't follow through on it. How do you make sure that if we have a deal, it's actually enforceable?
I think China, by and large, is a pretty good place. It certainly worked well for the Chinese, and I think it's desirable that it works well.
We want China to prosper.
Yeah, we do.
If you postulate a world where in the next 50 years, the China, or for that matter, the United States, but feel like they're being abused and the word isn't being kept, and you ask for one thing and then you want to ask for one thing more. I mean, you're going to always have tension between the two countries. You'll always have disagreements, but you can't really turn it where it gets into something where it gets out of control, and things can't get out of control.
But I guess I'm going back to try and figure out which side you think is right. Nobody wants to say that. Does anybody have a feeling?
Well, I think they're both right to be as concerned as they are, and I predict they'll settle it.
Would you all agree with that same prediction? Bill, what do you think?
You know, it's a dilemma when it appears you're reacting to an ultimatum. You know, in the Chinese case, there's no elections scheduled, so their leader won't be unelected simply because they've had to take a tough stance on trade negotiations. You know, markets up until recently were assuming this deal would get closed.
Right.
So that's a little bit why you see the delta. The rational thing would be for a deal to get closed, and I'd still rate that as likely.
I agree with Bill.
Deadlines are tricky things, though. I mean,
yeah.
they produce reactions in people, and they can particularly if you're responding to public opinion, they can inflame people, and then they start reacting to their own. They're tricky things. On the other hand, sometimes it's the best way to get things done.
A good sign, though, maybe that they just said that the Chinese delegation will continue to come, because I had real questions about that, or doubts about that myself after seeing that yesterday.
You want to conduct a negotiation so it doesn't look like the other guy has to cave or something like
right.
that. The ideal thing is to make a hero out of him and still get the deal you want.
Over the weekend at the annual meeting, you two had an aside on stage that a lot of people kind of picked up on. You didn't follow up on it, so I thought we could do that here. You were talking about Dairy Queen and how your presence in China is not large, but you do have a presence in China.
Yeah, we're all over China.
For Dairy Queen, it is a very large presence, but not for Berkshire Hathaway.
No.
But you made the comment, Warren, that you would have been a much larger presence had a big deal gone through. You made it in as a aside to Charlie, but it was over the mics.
Well, we've looked at bigger. It didn't have anything to do with Dairy Queen.
No. I figured not.
We are not turning Dairy Queen into some global giant, or we've looked at good-sized things in China, and we've done a couple things in China, and Charlie's done more individually, and it's logical. I mean, with the kind of capital we have, the big markets outside the United States are going to be the place where you're most likely to do something, and certainly China's going to be the biggest market and outside the United States, and there should be opportunities there. And I think we are someone at Berkshire, I think that if they're looking for capital around the world, we're a very logical prospect.
Why did that deal not work out? Was it because of the trade tensions?
I can't go into any details on that.
Thought I'd try.
You'll be the first to know.
In terms of what you do with your businesses, do these trade talks have any impact on you, on your investments, even your own personal ones, because you all have a large individual portfolio that you do. And Charlie, I know you focus a lot.
Some are larger than others.
Well, Charlie, I know you focused a lot on China. Does this diminish your enthusiasm for Chinese investments in any way?
No.
No, it doesn't really. If we got a call today from some business we understood and liked from China, and they were looking for a lot of, it was big, we would be delighted to get that call, and we would follow through and we'd see whether something happened. But that would be very interesting to us.
Bill, how about you?
Well, certainly, there is, in parallel with the trade talks about what the technology export regime will look like in terms of things like artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so I have some concerns about whether that will try and partition, Chinese students from American students. The general sentiment towards China right now has gone down a bit. And so there are businesses or business deals that have to go through a new process, and they're talking about even making that tighter.
CFIUS or beyond?
So I'm worried about even the sort of intellectual cooperation being slowed down. We'll see where that goes, but it's a concern.
If they take our intellectual property at Dairy Queen, we can handle it.